Thank you very much, and thank you for those attending the session and for SACS for the organization and inviting us to this to exchange on the topic, which is coming after a long list of panels discussing more the drugs and the therapeutic in the space, and it's going to be our job to take more medical device, neurotech, and diagnostic kind of approach. And the topic of the panel will lead us to discuss the major trends in the space, the challenge, especially on the capital raise and the exits, and in general, how we're going to bring innovation in the space and how this is eventually competing or complementary to the work that the drugs company are doing. So we're going to start with a round of introduction. I'm going to ask my co-chair, which has been together with me doing that for a number of years. So you're going to start introducing yourself, Jeff.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jeff Cohen. I'm Director of Research at Ladenburg Thalmann, which is a middle market investment bank, and I mostly focus on med tech, medical technologies in various forms, from cardiac and vascular to neurology. So, and thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Erwin Böttinger. I'm a professor for AI and human health at the Mount Sinai Health System in New York City. But I'm also, and that's probably why I'm here, the director of the Wyss Center for Bio and Neuroengineering. It's a translational neuroengineering engine, I have to say. We are in Geneva, Switzerland, working with some of the most renowned technical universities in Switzerland, connecting with academic projects and de-risking academic projects to prototype stage so that they can be spun out and finding interest of investors. Hello. And also can be leading to strategic partnerships with strategics. So we are focused on two main areas. One is brain-computer interface technology, and I'm really excited that there is a major spin-off from the Wyss Center that is pending. Stay tuned. And it is transmitting, it's the only one that is transmitting raw data from the brain. It's a sensor, brain sensor, so to speak, to feed what we envision to be an algorithm economy. We also have AI-guided neuromodulation, where we focus on various means of non-invasively modulating and stimulating the brain to improve mental health disorders and also outcomes of neurorehab and various other indications. With that, I'll pass on to James.
Well, thank you, Erwin. My name is James Cavuoto. I'm the editor at Neurotech Reports. We're a publishing, market intelligence, and conference firm located here in San Francisco. We were launched in 2001, which makes me very old, but also we're the longest serving publication covering the neurotechnology industry. Our flagship publication is called Neurotech Business Report. And about 7 years ago, we launched our second publication called Bioelectrics Business Report, which covers the related field of bioelectronic medicine. And for anyone from the pharmaceutical industry, this is a publication that's really covering the intersection between drugs and devices, and particularly neuromodulation therapies for non-neurological disorders, so systemic disorders, cardiac disorders, lung disorders, etc. And we also produce an event called the Bioelectronic Medicine Forum. It's in New York City on April 10. We'd love to see you all there. In addition to our two publications and our conferences, we also have a consulting arm. My colleague, Jeremy Koff, who's an experienced consultant in this industry, is here with us today, and he heads up our consulting arm. So happy to be here. And Julie, pass it on to you.
Thanks, James. So hi, I'm Julie Rachline. I'm a French, as you can tell by my accent. I'm PhD by training, so I used to be a scientist. I also used to be a venture capitalist for roughly 10 years, and I've joined the dark side of entrepreneurship through many hats. But today I'm a BrainTale CEO, and what we do at BrainTale is that we basically have developed a platform technology that transforms DTI onto brain measures to measure precisely neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration and supports both patients in the clinic. So we do have already medical devices that are being used with real patients and with real clinical decisions being taken, and also provided as clinical surrogates and exploratory endpoints to secure clinical trials for CNS disease modifying drugs. And now it's to you, Ken.
Okay. Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for being here. Ken Mariash. Started my career in the drug space, and then I got drawn into this exciting new space called neuromodulation, which really was in its infancy long, long ago. And I was excited by the possibility of delivering what was not called bioelectronic medicine at the time, Jim, but was delivering electrical impulses to modulate organ systems, specifically in spinal cord stimulation, deep brain stimulation, and peripheral nerve stimulation. And so I was fascinated by the ability to precisely target these new modalities and to see amazing effects, particularly in the areas of Parkinson's and tremors. I have since come to Sinaptica as the company's first CEO. Sinaptica is developing a non-invasive neuromodulation personalized system for Alzheimer's. We have 2 phase 2 studies. One is published at 6 months and another is presented at 12 months that show unprecedented efficacy in Alzheimer's across the board on measures of cognition and function and behavior. So excited to be here to share a little bit and discuss some of these mega trends in neuromodulation and medtech.
Great, thank you, Ken. So Shaheen Lakhan, I'm the Chief Medical and Scientific Officer of a company called Click Therapeutics. We're based out of New York. I'm a neurologist and pain management specialist by training and practice, former department chair and dean of medical school, and I keep a few professorships on a voluntary basis right now. If you haven't heard of Click, we basically make software that is medicine. And these are FDA-regulated mobile applications that actually treat diseases and hit drug endpoints. We're a privately held company backed by Sanofi Ventures, HIG, XLMed, F Prime Capital. We're around 180 FTEs, and we have a pretty good portfolio. We're now a commercial stage organization, strategic partnerships with Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, and glad to announce last year we have the first app that's FDA cleared to treat major depressive disorder in a collaboration with them. We also have strategic partnerships with Boehringer Ingelheim. We are leading 2 out of their 3 CNS products into late stage development for schizophrenia. We recently closed down on 2 phase 3s in migraine, where we hit the primary endpoint on monthly migraine day reduction without any safety risk, and we have a bunch in the pipeline. Glad to talk to you if you have drugs that need further efficacy, safety, and tolerability, because the FDA opened up the doors where if we study our products together, whether you're marketed or in development, our contribution, the app contribution, could go back to the drug label, extend loss of exclusivity. Obviously, patient preferences become digital as well. So speak with me if you want to. Yeah, back to the chair.
Thank you. And just before we kick off the discussion, myself, Diana Saraceni, I'm a founding partner at Panakès. We are a European-Italian investment firm with 300 million under management, invest in mostly in medtech, but also in therapeutics. Any ticket size 1 to 10 million, any stage seed to Series B. And yes, we're well known for our medtech exposure. We have 2/3 of our portfolio in medtech and 4 companies in Neurotech in particular. I think we're one of the most active investors in Neurotech in Europe. About myself, I have over 20 years of venture capital experience. Before co-founding Panakès, I co-founded also another investment firm and raised and invested a number of funds across sectors. So maybe we can now kick off the discussion with you, James, a little bit of like the latest data, recent data on what are the trends, especially in capital raise, which I know you monitor and track. Is there appetite for the space? Investors are interested. Is the situation a bit better than it used to be like 12 months ago, last time we spoke about it?
So it's been an exciting year in both the neurotechnology industry as well as the related field of bioelectronic medicine. For anyone that's interested, we published a kind of a review or synopsis of the year 2024, and you can find that on our website, or you can give me a card. I'll be happy to send you the article that reviewed activities in the industry. Probably the most exciting thing that happened during the year was a $3.7 billion acquisition. Boston Scientific bought a company called Axonics, which is a California company that had developed an implantable neuromodulation device to treat OAB. Now, they had some other products, but it was primarily neuromodulation for OAB. This represents the single largest transaction that has occurred in this industry in the 24 years that we've been covering the industry. Now, someone once said, well, there was a $1.5 billion deal 20 years ago that if you adjust for, okay, maybe. But in terms of pure dollars, this was the biggest. And that's exciting to me because not only is it a reaffirmation of the growth potential for this industry, but it's really a boost for the investors and for the entrepreneurs who are in this space. Investors love to see exits. And whether it's an IPO or whether it's an M&A activity, seeing home runs like this gets people excited. And in the months that have followed, in fact, just in the last 4 weeks in the industry, we've seen a number of early stage investments, A rounds and B rounds in the 10, 20, 30, $40 million range. And this is a new level. We're not used to it. So again, happy to provide specifics of some of those transactions, some of the M&A activity that took place during the year, some of the investment, but lots of activities. And yeah, I'm excited. It's an exciting time to be in the industry.
I'm glad to hear that because I saw that there was like a very recent, last very few weeks trend, but like reopening. Is that visible also on the public markets, Jeff, or how do you see that, or some segments maybe in Neurotech?
Thanks, Dan. I think more of the activity that you've seen is earlier stage and private rounds. I think in public space, we've seen a lot more of the same. We've seen some focus on TMS. We've seen focus on diagnostics as well, and some combination therapies which have been pursuing the FDA and approvals out there. I guess we did want to jump into the next area, which is on the funding side. If anyone wants to comment as far as what areas are attracting more grants and more university funding and more public funding, please jump in.
And any of you like raising funds at the moment that have been granted also some money, especially the European company? Julie, how is the France system doing?
We just never stop raising funds, public, private, equity, non-equity, M&A, whatever. Your question refers to something specific or in general?
Well, if you're fundraising, you can tell how the market conditions you find, how, yeah, please. Erwin.
Maybe to elaborate on what you were saying, I think that the momentum is very good. Everyone's looking and eyeing at neuro and neurotech opportunities. Even though a lot of people are looking at it, I still have challenges in sometimes understanding the trigger point for decision and the time to action. So I think it's kind of a growing interest, and real exits and big money is now really changing the way we can see these opportunities. However, I think that the interest still needs to be really pushed forward with exits and big money and big return for investors. So I would say I'm pretty confident, and I think it's going into the right direction. Private, public funding, non-dilutive and dilutive all together. However, I think we can do better, and that hopefully 2025 will be a year where we will understand the trigger point for time to action and time to invest.
Erwin, you want to comment as well?
Yes, indeed. And in particular in two areas. After I have been based in Europe now for 10 years, first in Germany and now in Switzerland, I can say from the European perspective, there is a very clear effort to provide increased funding, in particular for mental health. I want to mention in particular the Wellcome Trust. The Wellcome Trust has now actually a separate entity that is Wellcome Trust Mental Health that are issuing calls every few months, including very advanced calls asking for digital therapeutics, medtech, and a separate call now on leveraging AI in mental health context. So there's a lot of activity. I note also some of the larger German, because that's where I was based, funding agencies, in particular for academic groups. That's what you were asking, I think. And certainly the vehicle is grant mechanisms for those activities. They're focusing on mental health. There's activity increasingly in Alzheimer and dementia. That's also very clear. All the European governments are, dealing like in the US and many other societies with demographics and aging populations. And that is becoming increasingly an activity providing grants. Largely targeting basic research, though, and sort of to what extent translational work like what we are engaged in and many others leading to prototypes and then opportunity for product development, that remains to be seen.
And Shaheen and Ken, I mean, you run U.S. companies. Grants is less obvious. It's with some exception coming from the NIH or some programs sometimes, but it's less available in general. But you guys are seeing any impact of that?
Oh, sure. I could start perhaps. And actually on the Wellcome Trust, so as of a few days ago, I got voted in as an advisory committee member, particularly for innovations and mental health. Obviously, I'll recuse myself from my own applications, but welcome a call to anyone who wishes to secure funding there. They've subsidized a great amount of good inventions, essentially, which has led now to the bench side, to bedside. In the US, a lot of it actually is focused around substance use disorders. On the backdrop of the HEAL initiative, the NIH HEAL initiative, over $1 billion funding for direct clinical translation of either community-based programs, drugs that just need that extra effort to get widely implemented into areas in which the opiate epidemic has hit hard. Good amount of funding for substance use disorders through SBIR grants, and particularly looking for collaborations of academic, sponsor, and now healthcare systems to actually implement many of these innovations. And I think the last one will be, frankly, the DoD in a lot of these innovations using non-invasive neuromodulation. So I'm exercising all those channels, and I trust if you guys haven't heard of it, kind of check out their sites. Yeah.
I would only add, Diana, that in the neurodegenerative space, we do see a lot of opportunity for government funding. Unfortunately, with the incoming administration, a lot of that is in question, and we'll see what shakes out. But clearly, there's a public health crisis in slow motion with Alzheimer's and dementia, not just Alzheimer's, but other forms of dementia as well, which with the aging population only become more tragic and more expensive. It's already a $300 billion direct cost area for Alzheimer's. And then you add on top of that the $300 billion in indirect costs, these families that get sucked into taking care of loved ones. It really is a slow-moving emergency. And so I hope that the government funding stays there with the NIA and other aspects. We've looked at DARPA funding as well. The VA is an interesting avenue as well. And then there's the private foundations. There's quite a few in the United States. The ADDF obviously being the biggest one with Gates money and Lauder money and Jeff Bezos as well. So those are avenues as well.
And I'm going to stay with you, Ken, because you mentioned Alzheimer's, and this is, the area you tackle. Can I ask you just straight away if you think you can complement or compete with the solutions you're trying to implement with the drugs, and address that? Let's kick off the discussion also there to understand where devices are positioned against therapeutics.
Thanks for the question. It's a good question whether or not we're ready to accept the advent of device-based therapeutics for neurodegenerative conditions. But I would point to the acceptance in DBS. DBS has been around for quite a while, since the 90s at least, and works very well in Parkinson's and also in essential tremor and dystonia. It also has applications in epilepsy and depression, and I could go on. So it's a widely accepted and I would say somewhat disruptive technology. And so the question is now, can we get those kind of effects without sticking a wire in the brain? That is the question. So with non-invasive approaches or less invasive approaches, can we modulate areas of the brain? Can we restore plasticity in the brain, especially in the case of dementia, through non-invasive means? And there are many modalities that have a lot of promise. There's transcutaneous alternating current, there's direct current, there's obviously TMS, which is our preferred modality. TMS is very powerful, it's very focal, can be delivered in very precise ways to target just those networks that are affected by this disease. So far, the data has been very promising from our studies that I mentioned before. And with respect to the drugs, there is a lot of promise in the drug pipeline, but there are also deficiencies that we need to be cognizant of. The side effect profile. Once you inject a monoclonal antibody into the vein, it goes everywhere. It targets everything. In many cases, the side effects can be quite debilitating. In the case of ARIA, ARIA side effects are brain swelling and brain bleeding in the case of Alzheimer's, which can range up to a third of patients experience brain bleeding with some of these drugs. Nonetheless, they offer new hope to patients. There's been nothing until now except these drugs that have just been approved. Do we see neuromodulation as complementary? You bet. For two reasons. One, neuromodulation, especially in the case of TMS, is non-invasive, and so the side effect profile is almost zero. And so that argues for adding any kind of therapy on top of it that could be synergistic mechanistically too with our mechanism of action and others, which in our case is the induction of neuroplasticity. So there's complementary modalities. However, here's the big however. Getting approval of combination therapies is going to be a challenge, right? So we need to do one thing at a time. We need to walk before we run, get these things approved separately, and then look at combination therapies. The FDA needs to be more transparent about the regulatory pathways for these things. We need to have some precedents. We need to have the agencies combine and work together in a coordinated fashion to do combination trials and get those off the ground. Because we know there's not going to be a silver bullet, especially in the case of Alzheimer's. There's going to be a combinatorial approach that will eventually get us there. But I think that TMS therapy showing positive results across the board in all domains is a great first step to getting there.
Ken, and thank you, Ken. And Shaheen, competing with drugs, complementing drugs, how is the digital therapeutics space at the moment?
Yeah. Don't compete with drugs, enhance drugs, right? And so, I fully buy into non-invasive neuromodulation. And, one not on your list would be actually a digital therapeutic delivering that, right? So everyone probably sitting here has a smartphone. That's now your drug delivery device because we have designed patented exercises that could effectuate faulty brain circuits, right? And we've proved that out in our major depressive disorder product. That's not just psychotherapy. That's actually a patented process to fix a faulty brain circuit called cognitive emotional control. And we hold that. And the FDA has granted us clearance, and it's marketed right now by Otsuka. I think we could do the same across a variety of diseases, across neurodegenerative diseases, at no safety risk. Everyone's now empowered in their own process, right? Because pills and sometimes even zapping and electrical stimulation, these are passive acts. We know once you fix a faulty brain circuit, what happens then? Most of the studies, actually the FDA is calling for, show me functional benefits. Not that you improved a biomarker, not that you improved a clinician rating scale sometimes. It's like what's meaningful and practical and applicable in that patient's life. And I think the only way to do that is this drug delivery device, a smartphone.
Thank you. And Julie, I mean, you were with the biomarker you're developing. I mean, do you certainly not compete with drugs, that's for sure. But do you enable drugs, or is that the approach, or how do you work with pharma companies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree to what you were saying. It's not competing, it's definitely enabling. Even though what we provide with BrainTale is somehow different, and I would say again complementary, as what we do is not directly for patients, it's mostly for investigators actually and physicians. And how can we provide them with better tools to better take care of their patients directly in the clinic or through clinical trials? But the reality is that there's probably not just one single answer. It's going to be just like in any other disciplines. It's going to be multimodal approaches, and it's going to be plural answers to some very specific questions. Meaning we're going to need some digital therapeutics, we're going to need some PROs, we're going to need some smart new developments in terms of, I would say, traditional therapeutics, of course, but also in terms of new modalities of treatments, new ways. And part of the challenge is to refer also to one of your previous questions was in terms of funding. And the reality is that there might be also some go-to-market new strategies that we just don't know yet about. And we will need to find a way. We will need to really structure the neurospace, Alzheimer's and cognitive disorders, which is already a huge and amazingly high needs opportunity as we speak, which will probably, by the way, already too late for some people already. But having said that, we need to see things differently, to team up and to really, I would say, structure how can we combine all of those amazing approaches of TMS, therapeutics, digital, and what we do, of course, with BrainTale too, in terms of biomarkers, accelerate the development of new therapies, provide better clinical care, but also think of new treatments globally, and I would say, globally speaking, new modalities.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If I can just follow up on your previous questions, first of all, what are the areas that are most ripe or have received the most investment, private and public? What are the areas in general? When we started this publication 25 years ago, it was basically pain. That was it. It was neuromodulation. And believe me, pain is still a big market, but the interventions, even within the neuromodulation space, are much more diverse. I mean, there's implanted electrical devices, there's surface-worn devices, there's wearables, there's different types of pain that are being treated with different therapies. So you have headache pain that's being treated with a wearable on your arm, or with a minimally invasive device. There's knee pain. There's different varieties of pain that are being treated. But of course, it's more than pain. Movement disorders became the next big area, Parkinson's disease, essential tremor. But now we're seeing a number of other neurological disorders, epilepsy, Alzheimer's, and psychiatric disorders becoming very much in vogue in terms of neurotech investment. Where's the money come from? Well, just in the last year, Precision Neuroscience is a BCI company. So a lot of, they got a $50 million round. InBrain Neuroelectronics also got a $50 million round. A number of these BCI companies rightly or wrongly, are getting good attention, in part because Elon Musk started a BCI company called Neuralink. They themselves have raised a considerable amount of money, but they've indirectly raised money for their competitors. But this is a long slog for the brain-computer interface. Yes, in the long run, there is potential in terms of neuroprosthetics products for people suffering from ALS or high-level spinal cord injury, but it's going to be a while, and I think that even the vendors acknowledge that. We had a panel discussion a few weeks ago where the major players all recognize that, look, this isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take a while. Other areas that are getting funding, I mentioned the deal with Axonics, but there's another company called Nuspera, which has a implantable, minimally invasive device for OAB. They got $23 million. A company called Noctrix Health got $40 million for restless leg syndrome. You have companies with getting money for wearable devices, non-invasive devices. So it's really a range of applications that just didn't exist 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. And with the advent of bioelectronic medicine, we're seeing new therapies emerge for disorders that previously were only within the realm of the pharmaceutical industry. And so it opens up the doors for partnerships, it opens up the doors for combination therapies, and it opens up the doors for treating diseases in new ways, in ways that can help pharmaceuticals, for instance, neuromodulation therapies that can impact the blood-brain barrier, right? If you can use this as a way to get drugs to the brain that otherwise wouldn't have gotten there, well, now you have a kind of a partnership, if you will, a symbiotic relationship between a device intervention and a drug intervention where, it's like Reese's peanut butter. You need both in order to get it done. So, so I'm excited about a lot of these areas that are kind of at the intersection of other areas of medicine, and we haven't even begun to discuss the potential market for consumer neurotechnology. I just got back from the CES conference in Las Vegas and was amazed at the extent to which there's interest both on the exhibit floor and within the conference program itself for neurotech, healthcare, and consumer applications of neurotech. But that's another story.
Amazing. Erwin, please.
Yes, I wanted to pick up on the buzzword of neuromodulation, and TMS has been mentioned and certainly has been great progress. I would argue that going forward, there is indeed the challenge that non-invasive neuromodulation is obviously extremely attractive because it can be brought into large populations by very common disorders that can be potentially administered by patients themselves with AI guidance in the confines of their home and in the convenience of their home, and develop technologies that can accomplish that. I think will have huge potential. But the formidable challenge for anything non-invasive is, to really specifically reach the target that is in the neural circuits, the source of the abnormal, neural dynamics. And so that targeting, the very precise targeting, and that's often affecting deep brain structures, that we're nowhere near that. That requires a lot of work. And that will also, for different disorders, probably require different modalities. I think TMS is on a good path. There's also focused ultrasound, which, I've been in the neurosurgical suite and witnessed the use of high-intensity focused ultrasound to burn and a focus of essential tremor. And that was very impressive. And I figured this is high-intensity focused ultrasound inpatient procedure. If the low-intensity focused ultrasound approaches can be brought to bear to effect with targeting very specific areas in the brain. And if we can prove that that actually is happening, there's a lot of potential. We are trying this in epilepsy, and we are also thinking about going forward with focused ultrasound for a number of psychiatric disorders. So those are all potential interesting topics. Transcranial temporal interference stimulation is a way to bring electricity through two electrodes that were at the interface of the two electrical beams. There is the area of action, has shown a lot of potential in neurorehabilitation by increasing memory learning. I think that's another area where there's a lot of potential, and we are in there. One thing that has not been mentioned is using sensory pathways as gateways to the brain. And so there's a lot of activity now in using the visual sensory pathway. And in the end, the visual sensory pathway is connecting, I've been told by the connectomics people, to about 80% of brain circuits. So one can think about ways to get through the eye stimuli to various circuitries that have a positive impact. There's a lot of activity with that by sending certain frequencies through the eye to affect sharp wave riplets that have to do with memory formation, and that's a path to memory improvement or prevention of memory loss. There is, the idea of training healthy areas of the brain to compensate for visual loss in atrophic macular degeneration. I'm sorry. So the possibilities are endless. The issue is who can actually target this to the right structure and hit the right endpoints to prove efficacy. And that is going to be the key. And there a lot of people are chasing this, but there will be successes. And I think with a number of different modalities across a number of different indications.
Thank you all. This is very exciting, fascinating. Nevertheless, raising, and we have seen sign of a good renewed investment pace, but not that we can't say that it's easy, right? Raising money in the space. So, let's try to share with the audience where I think there's a number of entrepreneurs that be fundraising. The best recommendation we can, given the challenges of raising capital, what would be your advice or where to go? I'm not going to start with you and the public markets, because I don't think there's much there, right? Like going IPO early, it's not an opportunity for at the moment. You can confirm that, Jeff, can you? That early stage, no way. So maybe someone else wants to take the question, your 2 cents, your recommendation for entrepreneur raising the money.
For new areas, for
for the space, for Neurotech. Other than, yes, replacing with grants and things we have talked about earlier on, but raising capital.
It's really it's two different questions. One is, well, where's the money right now? And another is, well, where should the money be? So, let me take that latter question first. Where areas that are not well funded that should be. I think visual neuroprosthetics is one. There have been a number of startup companies to pursue this that have come and gone. Hundreds of millions of dollars raised. And the problem is that it's just difficult. And it's especially difficult to do it entirely with private money. The amount of money that it takes, the amount of time that it takes to develop the technology, you have a very willing patient community and blind people. Unlike some other disorders, even ALS, there's a disorder where you would think, patients would be eager to have a brain implant that can restore. Well, not all of them. It's still a sales, mission to say you should undergo brain surgery so that we can implant this device. It's a challenge facing the industry. But within the blind community, there's a lot of eagerness. In fact, some of the vendors like Second Sight, have had to kind of restrict their message because they get overwhelmed by blind people who are looking for a solution. And even any kind of vision. It doesn't have to be, oh, I want to drive again, or, even read small print. It's, can I separate my blacks from my darks from my whites when I do the laundry? Can I cross the street without a dog? I was impressed at CES. There were some innovative new technologies there. But in terms of developing an implantable visual neuroprosthesis, there's a few companies still in the business, and many of them have given up the idea of going into the retina with a retinal stimulation product, and they're looking at the visual cortex, V1, as a way to bypass the optic nerve, as a way to bypass retinal disorders. And there's some promise there, but there have been many other efforts that have failed. And I think this is an area where, when you think about, how we could be making individuals more productive, returning them to the workforce, saving money. We have an incoming administration that's interested in being more efficient and saving money. I think it's DOGE, something like that. Well, here's an area where we could save a lot of money that we're spending in care and long-term care for people who would otherwise be extremely, to some extent they already are, but it's not, private money by itself isn't going to solve this problem. So that's one area, where the money isn't. Where the money is right now is BCIs. And it's ironic because that's one of the longest term pictures. This is not an immediate market. And yet there's been, investors tripping all over themselves to put money into a number. Now, again, it's good for the industry. It's good, in theory for patients as well, because they'll have options. But there's risk. And the risk is that not all of these companies are going to succeed, or they're certainly not going to succeed in the short term. And our investors going to become frustrated and think that, oh my, we just wasted a whole chunk of money, and have that be a negative impact on the other areas of neuromodulation and neurotechnology that are phenomenally successful in the short to medium term. So, that's one of the little ironies of today's funding environment.
Julie, you wanted to comment?
Yes, sure. Two points actually I'd like to discuss. Number one is the challenge to demonstrate, as Erwin was saying, the evidence is how can we make sure that whatever will be developed is really achieving its objective and that the claim will be matched. So that's very critical, and that's probably one of the high risk that the whole industry in the neurotech environment is taking. But that's a high risk, high reward perspective. So it's acceptable by investors. And unfortunately, there are not as many Dianas as they are that should be around, because we would need more, we would need to clone you, actually, I think, either in Europe or in the US.
I would second that. We should.
Okay, thanks. And the second thing is the lack or the challenge of exit strategies for innovative neurotech innovations and companies, where if we don't have a clear exit strategy for investors, then attracting them to fund the company is already a challenge in itself. So besides the lack of investor itself, it's also the lack of perspective that we can offer. And it's kind of, working on the whole venture world, and what it means is that we need not only venture capitalists, but we need adventurers to really, help the company structure and pave the way for new strategies. And that's probably what I see as the main challenge.
Well, if I can comment, thank you, Julie. There was a number of failures in the space that obviously didn't help, but that is so true across all segments of life science, right? But some seems to suffer more than others, and the solutions are never obvious until they get to the end of the clinical trials and approved, and that's the challenge, of course. You wanted to comment, Erwin?
Yeah, so I wanted to have directly response to James, and with regard to the statement about BCI being a long game, which I think is probably true, but we do also see rather short-term or intermediate-term prospects, in particular in the area of restoring communication. And I was curious to hear your comment specifically on that indication.
Yeah, and in particular ALS. Now, here's a disorder where there's just not a lot of therapeutic options available, right? Now, at a minimum, if we can restore communication, this should be a short to medium term, and it already is, right? There's a handful of patients from the ALS community, from the high level spinal cord injury community, brainstem stroke community, locked in, right? This is the low-hanging fruit for the brain-computer, implantable brain-computer and interface industry, and it's a patient population that dearly needs the solution, okay? So in no way do I want to discount that, but what investors are looking for is a much larger community, one that may well develop in terms of applications that we can't even think of today. They haven't been fully discovered. So it's a really promising area, but it's difficult. And but in the short term, restoring communication is achievable. It's already been achieved, as your colleague pointed out in her talk this morning, by some of the pioneers 25 years ago, Dr. John Donahue and the BrainGate program. So yes, the foundation is there. Yes, the solutions are there. Let's move it forward.
And Shaheen, you wanted to comment as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think investors have treated us well in that our strategic partnerships are with pharma. And the upside is not just when these products prove out efficacy and get on the market, but it's actually in the co-development as well. So we have repeatable service revenue as we are building the asset, the digital therapeutic, as we're studying the asset, because we're running our trials and pharma subsidizing that. And then what pharma does best is commercialize, right? And so I don't have to build a whole sales, marketing, and commercial team, detail every physician in the psychiatry space or neurology space, and they kind of do that. So it's treated us model well. Now, the other thing is, and this is common to these communication disorders, there's a lot of things drugs do very well, but not in this space, right? And where neurotechnology can actually unlock the doors that has traditionally been inaccessible by drugs. And communication field is like perfect for that. In fact, with Boehringer Ingelheim, we are tackling negative symptoms of schizophrenia, which is a social cognition disorder. Everyone knows about psychosis and hallucinations. Unfortunately, just in the streets of San Francisco, you can see most of the homeless base actually have that problem. But once you stabilize those positive symptoms, things you gain, delusions, hallucinations, they suffer from things that they've lost, which is motivation, pleasure, sociality. Despite 100 clinical trials with drugs to try to tackle negative symptoms and cognitive impairments, all of those have failed and nothing has reached market. So Boehringer Ingelheim came to us and we designed a solution. We're in phase 3. That would be a first in disease and first in class, not just in the neurotech class, but every therapeutic class. I think that's what creates value, and investors have treated us well for that. Yeah.
Maybe one more topic along those lines of the discussion is this whole disconnect that exists between neurotech, medtech, and big pharma, kind of the elephant in the room that none of us are specifically pointing at. So is the environment coexisting better or not as good, or is there progress when you involve the AI in diagnostics? Maybe let's start with you, Deanna, and get your 2 cents there. Are things better or worse than they've been?
No, I'm positive. I think there is much more acceptance, and I mean the fact that the solution have to leave there are solutions that have to coexist and are synergetic one to another is quite visible. We have a number of companies that collaborate. I can mention one, for example, Cartera. It's an implantable device that opens up the blood-brain barrier and to allow a higher penetration in the brain of drugs, and obviously they raise interest from a number of therapeutics where they can allow a higher dosage, provided providing the same toxicity. And I mean, the programs are just very beneficial to both both companies, the device company together with the drugs, and that's just an example. There's a number of companies working alongside, and I think on the AI side as well, we've seen a number of partnerships where new AI engines can support a drug research, for example. And that helps a lot the ecosystem, and also, but the one thing that hasn't much changed, and you probably know that better than I, is that valuations wise, the assets are being perceived quite differently, nevertheless.
James, any comment?
So you're interested in my assessment of how these various segments of the healthcare industry have been working better together in recent years compared to, I think so. I think in recent years, and we've seen this particularly in the bioelectronic medicine area, where you've had pharmaceutical firms working hand in hand, either by investing in neurotech firms or partnering or acquiring technology. I mentioned the area where you're maybe stimulating the blood-brain barrier to enhance pharmaceutical therapies. There's other approaches where you are using, let's say, materials that can have an effect in treating cancer, for instance, or in treating, other systemic disorders, inflammation as an example. So we've definitely seen more examples in recent years of pharma companies participating with digital health companies, with neurotech companies, with research institutions. We'd like to see more of it. We'd like to see more, big pharma, at least awareness. But of course, it's a different scale, right? The pharma industry, much bigger than the neurotech device industry. So it's going to take time, but I think it's moving in the right direction, Jeff.
Can I just add, though? I mean, Jim, I would love to see that. I was at Baxter for almost a decade, and Baxter's one of those few companies that back in the day had a drug and a device division, quite a few actually, and some vaccines as well. And it was just so strange watching these divisions, how they didn't quite speak the same language. And then, my experience on the other side too is approaching, some pharma companies on drug device combos. At my job there, it was really hard to translate, especially the commercial model. And that's one thing we haven't really talked about is it's a different selling process. It's a different payer. It's a different reimbursement process. The sales force incentives and skill sets are quite different. Drug device combos are tough. But here's the bright side. I think necessity is the mother of invention. We have to get there. When I was at Boston Scientific, I drove one of the big digital initiatives to connect our devices to smartphones for the first time. That seems like an obvious idea now, but back in 2015, that was a crazy idea. And it was just kind of awful to watch us stumble, honestly. To do that, we had to hire a lot of outside expertise, and we had to lean on a lot of people who had been there before because we couldn't catch up. We just couldn't. But I think to get there and to work synergistically, we have to have more of the requisite skills in the regulatory front, commercial front, reimbursement front, and sales fronts all together working at some of these companies like Medtronic is a good example. Allergan was a good example of companies that could do it all.
Yeah, Ken,
Thank you.
I'll make it quick. All good points, but one extra thing to keep in mind is whether or not a pharma company sells one device, there's a lot of knowledge in basic science. So you have neurotech researchers who are identifying basic mechanisms, not just of how their neuromodulation therapy works, but how the underlying neural networks or cortical networks are involved in mood regulation or are involved in inflammatory disorders. And so even if they're not contributing products to be sold, the contribution to the advancement of understanding that will help whatever therapy, drug or device, is a big positive.
Thank you very much. So hopefully we sort of inspired more cooperation in the sector and also shared a little bit of optimism for capital raise given the recent data you shared with us, James. And thank you to everyone, to those who stayed with us for the panel. Thanks again to Sachs and to all the panelists for the interesting discussion. Thank you again.